Heavy fighting continues in the battle to win Bakhmut, a city which has become a symbol of Ukrainian resistance.
Thousands of travellers are left stranded in airports across Germany after strike action led to hundreds of flights being cancelled.
Silicon Valley Bank deposits are safe, according to governments in the UK and US, after the bank collapsed last week, marking the second largest bank failure in history.
Heavy fighting continues in the battle for the city centre of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. Commander of Ukraine's ground forces, Colonel General Alexander Syrsky, said that the Russian Wagner group has been staging attacks from several different directions in an attempt to break through the Ukrainian defence and advance to the central districts. But the head of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, acknowledged that his troops are facing fierce resistance.
Обстановка тяжелая, очень тяжелая. Противник грызется за каждый метр. И чем ближе мы к центру города, тем тяжелее бои. Украинцы подкидывают бесконечные резервы. Но мы идем вперед и будем идти вперед.
The battle for Bakhmut is the longest and bloodiest standoff since the conflict began. Moscow's forces have been trying to take this key city in the Donetsk region since last summer and have suffered heavy losses. While much of Bakhmut has been destroyed, it remains a symbol of Ukrainian resistance.
The conflict between the Russian Ministry of Defense and Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin likely reached its climax against the backdrop of the Battle of Bakhmut, the Institute for the Study of War says. The Russian Ministry of Defense is likely seizing the opportunity to deliberately expand both elite and convict Wagner forces in Bakhmut in an effort to weaken Prigozhin and derail his ambitions for greater influence in the Kremlin. Prigozhin had been able to grow his force by 40,000 convicts, likely with the Kremlin's permission into recruit in prison in 2022, but lost that permission and access to that manpower pool at the beginning of this year. Now, the UK Defence Ministry adds about half of the prisoners Wagner has already deployed in Ukraine have likely become casualties. If the ban endures, Prigozhin will likely be forced to reduce the scale or intensity of Wagner operations in Ukraine. He has already threatened to withdraw Wagner forces from Bakhmut and insinuated that the Russian Ministry of Defense used Wagner to bear the brunt of the high-intensity attritional urban warfare to seize Bakhmut in order to conserve Russian conventional forces. Russian forces have continued their offensive operations near Bakhmut, but have not completed the turning movement, envelopment or encirclement around the city. Wagner Group fighters are likely becoming increasingly pinned in urban areas, such as the Azom industrial complex, and are therefore finding it difficult to make significant advances. The Institute for the Study of War says Putin had ultimately allowed the Russian Ministry of Defense to retake control of the Bakhmut direction from Prigozhin in January, as Wagner forces failed to deliver the promised victory over Bakhmut by the end of 2022.
Relief for some, as governments in the UK and US took extraordinary steps to potentially avoid a major financial crisis after two banks failed. Silicon Valley Bank, which mostly catered to technology workers and venture capital-backed companies, collapsed last week, marking the second largest bank failure in history. Signature Bank followed 2 days later. On Sunday, U.S. regulators announced the bank's customers will be able to access their deposits, amid fears that the situation could spread further. In the UK, the Treasury and the Bank of England helped facilitate the sale of Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC, a move that the head of the Treasury said would protect deposits without taxpayer money.
Thousands of travellers were left stranded in airports across Germany after strike action led to hundreds of flights being cancelled. The industrial action at Berlin, Hamburg and Hanover is the latest stoppage by airport staff in a long-running dispute over pay. Unions are seeking a 10.5% salary increase for security and ground crews. Management have so far offered just 5%. Further talks will take place on March the 27th.
Former England striker and BBC presenter Gary Lineker will be returning to the airways after the British broadcaster was forced to lift his suspension.
What's he said?
This comes after the channel was compelled to scrap most of its weekend sports programme after commentators, analysts and Premier League players refused to appear as a show of support. The TV station suspended Lineker on Friday over one of his tweets criticising the government's proposed migrant bill and compared their language about migrants to that used in Nazi Germany. Piles of rubbish are littering the streets of Paris as garbage collectors continue to strike. The industrial action comes in protest against a controversial government pension reform that will raise the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. Locals are complaining of the smell and say it is affecting tourism. President Emmanuel Macron appears undaunted by the trash piling up and has refused to meet with union leaders. The bill was approved by the French Senate on Saturday and is currently being reviewed by a commission before being submitted for a final parliamentary vote on Thursday. North Korea has test-fired 2 strategic cruise missiles from a submarine just as U.S.-South Korea military drills are due to begin. Pyongyang says the launch confirmed the reliability of its underwater offensive operations of submarine units that form part of its nuclear deterrent. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, recently railed at the prospective joint military drills at a meeting with his generals. He views such military exercises as a major security threat, though Washington and Seoul say they are defensive.
It's the longest waterway in Italy and one of the major rivers in Europe. River Po cuts the north of Italy from west to east for more than 600 kilometers. For a few years now, drought has been turning the majestic body of water into a stream. The lack of water that is typical of summertime has also become a common sight in the first months of the year.
Siamo veramente in po', siamo a marzo, quindi normalmente qua in primavera, di solito con i disgeli delle nevi, l'acqua sarebbe più alta di noi, invece siamo qui e anzi il letto del Po è praticamente asciutto.
This time of year, the standard river flow would be around 1,000 cubic meters per second, while right now it is only 300 cubic meters per second, a historic low that is extremely worrying.
Alla mia destra l'acqua, alla mia sinistra terreno arido. Eppure non sono 2 ambienti diversi, ma è lo stesso ambiente fluviale. Infatti sto camminando nel letto del fiume Po, che per chilometri e chilometri la siccità ha reso secco.
The huge hydrographic basin of the Po River, which is around 71,000 square kilometers, provides water for irrigation and electricity to people living in nearby regions. But now everybody is feeling the effects of the drought.
È quasi un anno, forse più, che non piove e noi stiamo programmando adesso le colture per la prossima estate, perciò non avendo acqua non possiamo neanche pensare di coltivare o seminare o trapiantare magari i pomodori come facciamo noi, perché non avendo acqua non possiamo programmarlo.
The Malato Dam is located on one of the Po's tributaries. This year, the dam is only at 12% of its capacity, a 10-year low. Last year, that number was around 30%.
La diga piena sarebbe agli sfioratori, quindi a quei buchi. Oggi, dove siamo con i piedi, ci sarebbero almeno 5, 6, 10 metri d'acqua sopra di noi. Quindi davvero è una situazione, e siamo a marzo, anzi a metà marzo, in cui di solito abbiamo la diga piena, anzi in alcuni casi lasciamo anche andare acqua.
Images like these have become a common sight, and they will probably stick around as another rainless day passes by.
Luca Palamara per Euronews, Piacenza.
Since the day of his election 10 years ago, Pope Francis' papacy has differed from his predecessors. Being the first Roman pontiff from Latin America and the first to name himself after St. Francis of Assisi were some of the early signs of the change he would bring about within the Church. His reforms and comments on climate change and poverty have made headlines around the world. He has been working tirelessly to foster relations with the Islamic world, becoming the first Pope to visit Iraq.
Durante i 10 anni di Bergoglio noi abbiamo assistito alla più grande redistribuzione di potere tra città, nazioni e continenti nella storia della Chiesa contemporanea. Il vero potere nella Chiesa sta nel collegio dei 120 cardinali che eleggeranno il nuovo Papa. Sono diminuiti i cardinali, i posti, il peso geopolitico dell'Occidente ed è aumentato esponenzialmente quello dell'Oriente.
But many in the conservative wing of the Roman Curia have long criticized Pope Francis. We met Franca Giansoldati. She recently released the book she wrote with Cardinal Müller. He's considered to be an open critic of Pope Francis.
Nella Chiesa ci sono sempre state destra e sinistra, conservatori e progressisti, però si è sempre arrivato a una sintesi che in qualche modo riusciva a contenere tutto quanto. Con Papa Francesco, secondo i conservatori, questo modus operandi viene meno.
Criticism against Pope Francis has somehow intensified after the death of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, as well as rumors about his possible resignation.
Francesco non ha intenzione di dimettersi. Müller nel libro che abbiamo fatto sottolinea che le dimissioni non sono una cosa positiva per l'unità della Chiesa. E lui stesso, anche se appunto è il fronte opposto a Papa Francesco, è il primo a non volere le dimissioni di Papa Bergoglio.
Pope Francis has had to lead the church through some of the darkest moments of our times, from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine. He has made countless appeals and has condemned the conflict and has expressed interest to visit both Ukraine and Russia as part of the Holy See's efforts to bring an end to the ongoing conflict. Giorgia Orlandi for Euronews in the Vatican City.